Thank you so much, Rick, for being here today. As you can see, we've got a lot of really interested people in the audience here for the first view from the top of the year. So thanks to everybody for being here. You and I had a chance last week to grab coffee, and I walked away from that conversation feeling really excited about what we were going to talk about here today. I think you've got an incredible story to share about leadership at Yale, which I'm sure everybody's heard of. Then going into your recent transition to Coursera, which is one of the most buzzed about companies in education today. And lastly, your thoughts on leadership generally and advice that you have about lessons you've learned from your career and thoughts you have to share with our student community here. So I'd love to get started by stepping back to 1993 when you were first appointed president of Yale. And in a lot of ways, this was a little bit of a turnaround situation. You had a very significant operating deficit of about $20 million.
Seems like a lot at the time.
A lot at the time, a lot now. You had strained relationships with the faculty. And I think there were a lot of questions at that time about where Yale was going in the future. So how did you step into that role as president? What were your priorities as you thought about your strategy to address these issues?
Well, looking back, it was it's surprising to see that the major initiatives that I laid out in my inaugural address turned out to be the things that occupied me for 20 years. So some of it was not rocket science. Some of it was pretty obvious. We had a really terribly crumbling physical infrastructure. Most of Yale was built in the interwar period between World War I and World War II, and in collegiate Gothic style, and had not been touched since 1945, or 40. So there was basically massive amounts of investment needed to bring the infrastructure up to decent condition. And that sort of decaying look of the campus and the problematic nature of the city of New Haven, which at the time with very high unemployment, and the whole central business district essentially 1/3 vacant, where crime was rampant at an all-time high. All of these things were causing us to lose market share for the best students in higher education. And so Yale was at the edge of the best in the world, but at risk of falling out of that very top tier of universities. And so investment in both infrastructure and the city were just looming large as powerful things that needed to be addressed. And then there were a couple of things I saw at that time that were longer term that turned out to be major themes. One was internationalization, as your dean laid out. And thank you, by the way, Garth, for that generous, undeserved introduction. But one was internationalization, because I just thought the world was changing and globalization. People weren't using the word yet in 1993. But the phenomenon was clear. I mean, we needed Tom Friedman to give us the words, but we had the song somehow. And then the other was redressing the balance of Yale's strengths and weaknesses. That is, we were in danger of becoming so tilted towards the humanities, the social science, and the professions, and weaker in science, medicine, and engineering, that I felt we needed to sort of put more balance into that mix. A lesson, by the way, which Stanford should learn in the other direction, if you want my advice. But
we do.
So those were the big themes, and the first really major steps were taken toward urban citizenship in New Haven, which was a major project.
And tell us about that. What did you learn about working with the city at that time, and also pitching that to your board and trying to get buy-in for that effort?
Yeah, the board was there because the board was very nervous about the sort of reputation of New Haven as a dangerous place, and so they were entirely on board with investing significantly in the city. It was more a question of selling the faculty and the local constituents who felt, if Yale starts spending money to help fix New Haven, this was like pouring money down the drain, and so we didn't start by spending money. We started by doing other things. So the idea was, we had a 200-plus year history of town gown rivalry, ill will, was this rich ivory tower institution in a poor and declining industrial city that had been a prosperous industrial city, but was in great decline as manufacturing industry went away. The shirt making industry went to the south. The munitions industry at the end of the Vietnam War basically shut down, and there was nothing left. Really, nothing left. Literally, it was awful. So we had to, we needed to, we knew economic development was going to be a major theme, but we couldn't just jump into that. We were not trusted. So the issue was winning the bona fides of community leaders, of the political apparatus and of the other community organizations in the neighborhoods and in the clergy who had important political influence, particularly in the black community. So we set about it with volunteerism. I'm really mobilizing what was already happening, but organizing it in much more systematic ways. So basically, I had every dean of every school, told that it's part of your job description to have urban outreach and to get your students and faculty involved. So the drama school was doing improv theaters in the nearby neighborhood, and the forestry environmental studies school was planting trees and creating pocket parks in neighborhoods, and you can go on and on. All kinds of initiatives on the parts of students and faculty. And after a couple of years, it really helped. We were really kind of beginning to win the hearts and minds. Hey, Yale's different now. It's really engaged in helping the city and in being a participating citizen. And it was only at that point that the mayor came to me and said, we need to fix the downtown, and the only entity in the place with the capital and the vision and the self-interest to make that work is Yale. So with my blessing, go ahead and buy downtown and redevelop it. And I mean, that was amazing, from an historical point of view, that we had that opportunity, but it worked out really well. And we've got great retail, great food, really terrific restaurants in downtown New Haven now. It's actually, truthfully, I hate to say this, but it's actually nicer than Harvard Square.
We won't compare. But I think one thing that you were saying, Rick, that this idea of how you work with the faculty at your school, I think is really interesting. Faculty are generally tenured. You can't fire them. You can't force them to do what you want. So how did you go about creating a vision and getting them to really have a consensus on that?
Well, this is all true for almost any constituency where you need their support. I mean, this would be true to any of you who are leading organizations and you want to keep your senior staff with you, you want to keep the employees with you. Basically, a leader needs to articulate a vision. It needs to be clearly and coherently articulated. It needs to be tested with key people at the beginning before it's widely communicated. But then it's communicate. I mean, it's just getting the message out and going and patiently talking about it with skeptical audiences, answering questions, being open and responsive to suggestions and change, but also not yielding on the core vision. And one of the great things about faculty is they're basically rational, and even though they're very independent. And so persuasion is possible, actually. If it's a compelling argument, eventually you'll win. And that, I think that was the way, for things like, investing in the infrastructure, investing in the city, and internationalization, all of those strategies really became, I think, a pretty common consensus with time, patience, explanation, lots of meetings with groups to talk it through. Mm-hmm.
On the topic of internationalization, you did face some pushback on the decision by the university to open a campus in Singapore in partnership with the National University of Singapore. There was a lot of question around whether Yale should be partnering with a country that had some questionable stands on human rights in conflict with the way Yale felt. And so how did you make that decision to really put yourself behind that decision when you knew there was going to be public outcry?
Right. Well, so the initiative to start a liberal arts college in Singapore came rather late in my presidency. We started talking about it in spring of 2009, after I'd been in my position for nearly 16 years, and it was kind of the capstone of a major effort to do a lot of other things globally, lots of exchange programs, research facilities in China, all kinds of other things have preceded this. So the actual internationalization battle for hearts and minds within the university had already been won. What hit the nerve of some of our faculty, and I hate the leaders will always say this, but it was a really small minority of people who were really exercised about this. The majority, as one of my key advisors, one faculty member who I greatly respect, said to me about this before it blew up. He said, the thing is, you've got 15% of the people wildly enthusiastic about this, and 5% are just really upset about it. And the remaining 80% actually don't know or care, or that's totally indifferent. And he said, what you have to avoid is a situation where the 5% somehow get an issue where they can persuade the 80%. Well, that was so prescient because it turned out to be what happened. These faculty members tried to pass a resolution that said, we support full human rights in Singapore. Well, who's going to vote against that? Right? So it was not that they censored our doing it. It was not a vote of no confidence in our doing it. It was very clever. And so we took a few lumps in the press on this. Let me tell you why this is such a great idea, though. Asia is crying out for the kind of pedagogy that focuses on critical thinking. China trains enormous numbers of engineers, and Americans worry, are they going to eat our lunch someday because of this? And they look at us and they say, but all the innovation in the world is coming from the United States. And why? They have a very different method of educating people. They teach people to think for themselves, to be independent, to question the teacher, to speak up in class, to argue. We need more of that. And so the Chinese were kind of begging me to do this, to set up a liberal arts college within China. I thought that was an environment where it just wasn't ready for this kind of really free-ranging intellectual battles and questioning authority. But Singapore, frankly, for all the reputation of it, they're trying to maintain a kind of tenuous hold on what is a potential, what is essentially an island, a multicultural island in the middle of a very different ethnic composition of Malaysia and China nearby. Yes, the government's been authoritarian in many ways, and freedoms that we enjoy are not present entirely there. But the universities had always been in Singapore a kind of oasis where the rules are different and where free speech goes on and where academic freedom is practiced. And friends of ours said, look, if you are negotiating an arrangement with the Singaporeans, you can trust them to abide by, they'll be straight. If you write it down in a contract, they'll honor it. And so we wrote a great contract, which essentially protects academic freedom on the campus. It doesn't protect students who want to go march in the public square downtown, because that's not allowed in Singapore. You have to have a permit. But we had them define our campus as an indoor space. So was one way around this. And just a few weeks ago, there was a good example of this. A film which is politically critical of the ruling party was released in Europe, and it was banned for public exhibition in Singapore. But before the public ban occurred, we had already been assured by the government that yes, consistent with our understanding, you can show this on your campus. So I think we've negotiated a pretty reasonable arrangement. And by the way, it's an incredible. The students we're getting are amazing. The curriculum is a prescribed curriculum that in the first year that compares Eastern and Western intellectual traditions in social thought, in literature, and looks at comparative social institutions. It's really a radically different kind of curriculum, and it's all small classes, all 15 or to 18 students at most, and it's going great.
I want to go back to Asia in a little bit once we move into your time at Coursera, because I know that's a big market for you there as well. Right. But after 20 years at Yale, you ended up retiring in 2013. Mm-hmm. that didn't last very long.
First course I ever flunked was retirement.
Exactly. So I'm curious, you went from Yale, where you had a almost $20 billion endowment and 12,000 students, to Coursera, where you have $85 million in venture capital and 9 million users at this point. I don't know
10,
what the
north of 10, yeah.
10 million users at this point. So growing exponentially. That's a huge change for you. What made you think Coursera is the next step for me?
Well, I didn't think it when I left Yale. As president, I was out here visiting as a visiting professor in economics over at CEPR, and kind of thought I'd construct a life with a portfolio of things to do, like maybe go back and do some teaching, either at Stanford or Yale, or maybe half and half, and that I would be on a couple of boards and do some public service commissions and studies and things like that. So I could see a pretty full life ahead, but then I somehow just ran into the folks at Kleiner Perkins and was convinced, go take a look at this. And I went over and signed on as to be a consultant, essentially, come a week a month in this last spring semester, and I basically got seduced. They basically pitched me on. Actually, we have wonderful co-founders. They're Stanford professors. They're brilliant, imaginative, innovative. But we could use a CEO who could help take this to the next level. And so I succumbed. And I must say, it's more consistent with what I've been doing for the last decade or even 12, 14 years than I would have initially thought. That is, the big focus on internationalization, and also Yale did play an early role in online education. We started with Stanford as a joint venture, Stanford, Oxford, and Yale. We did a little startup in 2000 called All Learn that was an aesthetic success but a financial flop. We had the wrong market. That's one amazing thing about technology. I mean, we were stumbling like all people at the beginning, and we thought this was really for our alumni. Well, it's much too narrow a market segment. So Yale, Stanford, and Oxford were putting on these great courses, targeting their alumni. We just weren't getting the enrollments and sustaining it. And then in 2007, we started with open educational resources, and like MIT, we put a large number of our best courses online, but non-interactively, not like Coursera, not like the current MOOCs. It was just a camera in the back of the classroom, capturing the lectures. And that was great. It got a lot of viewership, but nothing like Coursera. I mean, when Coursera and Udacity and edX started to operate, you could see that the world had changed. Internet bandwidth was now supported large-scale interactivity, and so this is an amazing opportunity to democratize higher education. I mean, the reason I'm doing it is not the reason that most presidents and provosts will tell you that they are doing it. Most of them will tell you the main thing that's in it for me is I can improve on-campus teaching, because I get all this data on what works and what doesn't work, and I can use it at home. But to me, that's like saying the automobile, when it was invented, was a good tool for going to the grocery store. I mean, it misses the point that the scale itself is unbelievably powerful. And the idea that a single Stanford professor or a single Yale professor would teach one class, for 10 weeks or 8 weeks, and teach more students in that class than they would teach in a 30 or 40-year teaching career at home is amazing. It's taking the resources that we universities invest in, great teachers, developing their careers, becoming masters of a subject, becoming experts, and giving that expertise to the world for free. I mean, it's truly revolutionary, and that's what's exciting about it.
And it is very exciting, but how are you thinking about the research, Rick, that shows that the primary users of MOOCs at this point are college-educated white males? That sort of is contradictory to the goal that you have to provide access to millions of users and learners worldwide. So how are you and Coursera thinking about that issue?
We are doing all we can to promote outreach to the populations that wouldn't normally have access to this. But that is to say, I mean, sort of natural you'd expect highly educated, affluent people later in life to sample these courses. That's sort of obvious. You're all going to do it when you're looking for something interesting to do when you're 50 years old, apart from your job. But but there's a couple of things. So it's not surprising there's penetration there, but there's an amazing amount of penetration elsewhere. I mean, what does it mean to have a college degree if you're from a developing country with low per capita incomes? It doesn't mean the same thing in terms of what you've been exposed to as if you've gone to an Ivy League school or a Stanford or a first-rate institution in Europe. I mean, we are giving a lot of value to people, even if they're college educated, in places where what they got in college is nothing like what you all got. So that's one. Two is we are using various tools like creating live learning hubs in US embassies around the world. So where people who don't have the bandwidth can actually come and get access to it and have sort of mentored discussion groups. The State Department's very excited about this as an outreach, as a way of getting to people in Africa and the Middle East, and that's underway. So there, it's going to spread, and also cell phone technology is bandwidth is getting better and better in these developing countries, and we're now optimizing for mobile use. I mean, originally 4 months ago we put the lectures only, the videos on mobile applications, and now we realize people are using it. 30% of our viewership of our students are now accessing via their iPads or their tablets or their phones, and so now we're developing. By middle of next year, we'll have completely full interactivity. Everything you can do on a computer, you'll be able to do on the phone.
How are you thinking about who your main customer is? Because you've got the universities on the one side that are putting their content up on your platform.
Right.
You've got the students who are using it. And you also have the business community where you have an opportunity to provide support in terms of credentialing.
That's right.
So how are you thinking about those various strategies? Are you sort of executing on all of those at this point, or do you believe, like Steve Ballmer does, that you need one strategy and you need to do it really well?
Well, we couldn't succeed by ignoring all three pieces of that triangle. That is, we obviously need to appeal to. We have to optimize for the learner experience. That it has to be a really attractive presentation of the material. It has to be something people want to re-engage in after they try it. So that's just product design and good pedagogy and using the research from all the data to make the user experience better. We have to please our partners because this is Coursera specific now, because you wouldn't have to go this way, but our niche in this market is aggregating content from great universities. Many of the other people in the online education space are using faculty they hire freelance, which are largely from industry, not from universities. And for sort of business skills training, that's probably a pretty successful model. That's basically what Udacity is doing. They're focusing narrowly on the tech sector, hiring industry people to teach courses on tech skills. Our niche and our asset is relationships with now 128 universities who are the best in the world. And I think, it makes us different. It makes the average quality of what we do way higher, I think, than any of the competitors. And so we need to keep the partners happy. And then the business community comes in because we need people to recognize, our monetization strategy is basically, the education's free. But if you want verification, you want your identity verified and get certified as having completed the course satisfactorily, that costs $50, basically. We now are discounting the price in some of the developing countries. And to do that, you need business, for that to be something that people want to pay for, when it's also free, you need the business community to recognize some of these courses, about half of our courses are build skills, the other half are general education courses, but at least those half of the courses that the business community says, oh yes, we want people who've taken your data science specialization, or we want people who have studied Android programming on your platform.
I want to make sure to spend some time, Rick, on the fact that you went from really leading a room full of PhD academics to looking out at a room full of MBAs and product engineers, right? So how has your leadership style evolved since moving from a very traditional university into a startup where you're not only dealing with a different type of employee, but you're also dealing with two founders who still are very involved with the company? Mm-hmm.
There's a lot. It's different. That's for sure. But as a general matter, there's a lot that's in common in any leadership position. And I said it. Having a vision, communicating it clearly, picking the right people, putting them in the right jobs, enabling them, not micromanaging them. Those are all lessons that are very, very general. And running Coursera's sort of a little more, it's somewhere in between. It's sort of more like running the economics department than like running Yale, because it's a smaller population of people. In the economics department, we had about 50 faculty and 30 or 40 staff. So, of course, a little bit smaller than Coursera. And so, you have all hands meetings. You deal with the whole population. You didn't do that in a big organization like Yale. So you need to have, the ability to listen and process and organize people, delegate tasks to the right people. All that's the same. What's kind of different is the speed of the required speed of decision making in this internet environment. I mean, we're in a brand new startup business. We're constantly testing and iterating. We have to do our product development rapidly. Put something out there, try it. Do some testing, improve it. We're just working relentlessly, day and night, to make the product better and better. Build new features, make them work. That's just a relentless effort on a time scale with just higher pressure than you're used to in a university setting. And then there's questions about making strategic choices. They're coming at you all the time, and just as they are in the university. But in the university, everybody's used to, let's talk about this for 3 months before we decide. I mean, there's not that sense of urgency. You're well-resourced. Basically, the business of daily education and research is going to go on no matter what the president does, and so it's different. But in the small company, in a highly competitive environment where we're charting new ground, you have to be prepared to react more quickly, and actually that means be prepared to make a few mistakes, because you can't get everything right without a lot of deliberation. So you take some risks. That's what makes the world interesting.
Can you share any of those risks that you've taken that haven't gone so well?
Well, we haven't made any of those bad decisions since I've been there, but there were some made earlier.
Why even ask?
No, I think we have tried to work with our partners, the universities, to renegotiate certain aspects of our arrangements with them, and we've run into situations where they've been very adamant about maintaining one or two of the terms in our original agreement, which I fully understand why it recognizes their interests, but on the other hand, it's not consistent with sort of internet norms. We're an internet company, and there are what happens. Here's a good example. What happened? This is one we've just had a hard time. We would like to do more to essentially be able to take down comments on our interaction on our forums if they start to get harassing or threatening or and we've had some bad, there's some bad actors. We've had incidents that are bad incidents. And, the university perspective is we don't take anything down. We just, and certainly with my policy at Yale, if, hate speech is responded to with more speech. You basically, you use it as a teaching moment. You tell the community, this is inappropriate. But we're not going to take it. We're not going to take it down. But we're going to tell you we think this is inappropriate, and here's why. The internet's not like that. All the big social media places, are taking stuff down all the time, and so the universities really aren't ready to accept that. They want the university kind of rules to govern, and they don't want Coursera taking anything down without their involvement. And so we made a kind of a mistake reaching for this, I think. We've backed off, and okay, we won't do anything without talking to you first. But it's just a way, it's kind of give and take you see in these kinds of situations.
You've got a room full of potential entrepreneurs here, as well as people who have a real passion for education. So outside of what Coursera is doing, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for disruption in education today? And what advice would you have for the students here on how to pursue those opportunities?
Well, Jimmy, yes, this new technology does have the potential to disrupt higher education, but I think actually the near-term phenomenon, the phenomenon for the next decade, won't be that universities as we know them disappear. It'll be that universities actually have their impact amplified and become more important to society by virtue of having even more people, that they're engaged with. So that's one thing. But what in ed tech, I mean, the promise that ed tech's going to deliver miracles has been around for a long time. I remember when I started teaching as an assistant professor at Yale, all the excitement about what Carnegie Mellon then called programmed learning. That we're going to replace lectures entirely with computer drills that it was actually all print-based. That just basically take you through material in a programmed way, and if you get a wrong answer here, it leads you in this branch, and you get the following material, and if you get a right answer, it goes to this path. And that never happened. It's still a good idea. I mean, a modern version of this would be an idea I had at Yale, actually, that we couldn't get high school teachers to accept, which was we wanted to have Yale Press do a really first-rate Chinese language, teaching Chinese to English language learners, and my idea was gamify it. It's basically have voice recognition technology, and have you say something. You confront an obstacle in a game, and you have to communicate the words, orally, and the computer would fix it. I thought that would be a great way to teach, to teach language. The high school teachers we consulted with didn't want to even touch it, So it's going to be a long time before there's really revolutionary disruption in traditional education. In the meantime, all this stuff added around the fringes is going to, like MOOCs for university level stuff, and like the Khan Academy material and other things that focus more on K-12, I think it's going to be greatly enriching for people. It's going to make their lives better. I think it's creating great social value. I mean, I'd encourage you to think about, joining a startup and trying to help build something. The idea that we're going to completely disrupt the educational system as opposed to just reaching more people who are outside it or improving the experience of those who are inside it is probably just a little early.
Well, I've been speaking a lot here and asking you a lot of questions, Rick, so I want to make sure to open it up to our audience. Sure. And we have 2 mics that will be passed, as well as our hashtag GSB VFTT. So we'll be alternating between questions from the audience here and questions that Ryan will read from Twitter. So Ryan, do you have one ready to go?
Sure, yeah. We've gotten a few questions from the audience on Coursera and on your role at Yale. Mm-hmm. And one that keeps up that you might have an interesting perspective on is, what's your pitch to colleges or universities? Is it solely about amplifying the message of universities? How do you deal with the threats they perceive Coursera or MOOCs having to their traditional model? And is there a place for sort of a moral responsibility of universities to provide education to the masses?
Yeah, so that is, I mean, the scale that this offers has been my principal pitch to universities, and it's actually a kind of a hard sell. I mean, it's not. I think part of what I have to do personally is to carry that message. I mean, I think that it's. And one of the advantages of having been a university president and dealing now with university leaders is I do have some credibility. So people are kind of surprised when I say the first thing about this is not improving on-campus teaching, although it's great for that and it will help you do that. if that's what you focus on, you're sort of missing what really matters. So I have been pushing primarily the notion that this should redefine the mission of the university. Our mission, the mission of the university, if you go to most people's mission statements, will have something to do with the creation and the dissemination of knowledge. Okay, so we create knowledge through our research, we disseminate it through our publications and teaching. Well, we publish to increasingly small audiences. I mean, many professionals publish their articles and are read by, 100 people in their field, and that's pretty good. We disseminate it through teaching. Okay, and the teaching in many places, like GSB, is wonderful, but how big are the classes, and how many students does a professor reach? This offers on average, maybe 100 or 200 students a year is the amount of contact a faculty member has. And with a Coursera course, you reach tens of thousands. And that's revolutionary, I think. And it gives the university a chance to make a difference to, global development, to give economic opportunity to people all over the world, and to give lifelong learning opportunity to those who, don't need the economic advancement, but just are curious, just want to learn more, want to grow. So it's I think it's amazing. That is basically my pitch. I mean, yes, we'll support your on-campus flipped classrooms. I mean, it's great. Yes, we'll give you data. You can analyze it. You can figure out which questions in your quizzes are not working, and you can improve your lectures that lead up to those questions. Yeah, there's a whole lot of things we can do that way. And yes, we can generate revenue for you, but frankly, we think we can at least, but frankly, that revenue is not, the scale at which we can do that is not going to be a game changer for 128 different university partners. I mean, even if we were distributing $500 million, that's not a huge number for universities, to have. So I think it's mainly think about what is the social role of the university, and technology has enabled universities to move beyond the education of elites, of highly selected elites, to the world. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
Do we have a question from the audience?
I'd love to ask about a challenging decision you had to face kind of at the end of your time at Yale. Sorry, I'll stand up so you can.
Oh yeah, thanks.
You were, one of the hardest things that you had to deal with at your end of your tenure at Yale was expanding the residential college system, and obviously running into the financial crisis. The economics of that became challenging.
Yep.
It was rumored that one of the other View for the Top speakers offered a very large gift in order to, name one of those colleges after that person, and it was rumored that Yale turned that down. I realize that conversation is probably confidential and don't want you to have to delve too much into that, but can you talk a little bit about the challenge that you have as an executive between profitability and kind of organizational values, and how you think that situation potentially exemplifies that, and how you think about that at Coursera as you obviously deal with a number of kind of important morals and values in education, but also needing to drive profitability?
Good question. So, we put a lot of money into our facilities, and it was only after we got the campus mostly renovated that we decided that expansion would be a good idea. And, if you know the Yale system, we have these very, particularly since they've been renovated, amazing facilities that house undergraduates that create social environments and great communities and have amazing, facilities to support that. We wanted to build 2 more. It was high on the agenda right before the crisis hit, and along with a lot of other capital projects that we just basically froze at that point. I won't confirm or deny the rumor you heard, but I will say this. I think so we basically decided at the time of the financial crisis that if we're going to go forward with the colleges, we're going to have to raise 100% of the money. That we were going to have to be essentially an all-cash transaction. We weren't going to take new debt to finance the new colleges, and we would have to absorb the incremental operating costs in our operating budget. We'd have to have enough, projected future surplus that we could do that. So we were not going to rob anything existing in order to expand. There's no question that had we wanted to allow donors to name these colleges, we probably could have raised a substantially greater. We're naming towers and courtyards and entryways, but the names of the Yale colleges, originally were selected by the Yale Corporation to honor, important founders of the university or great Yale, Yale worthies, great citizens and contributors to public life or intellectual life who came from Yale. And my board did not want to name a college for a donor. And I have to say, I was very ambivalent actually on that subject personally, because I really wanted to see this project go forward. And we have lots of things named for donors at Yale, but I saw the argument, and it was pretty overwhelmingly. The Yale Corporation, which is a small, very highly deliberative body, was pretty strong about this, and so we had to disappoint at least one prospective donor who would have done this. I guess I didn't answer it. The general question is, yes, there's always a tension between values and practicality. But I have to say, at an institution like Yale, the choice comes down on the side of values way more often than not. And actually, I would say, this is probably more salient for all of you. Take it out of the Yale context. I mean, one of the things I always asked myself whenever we had a tough issue, any tough issue, was what is the right thing to do? I mean, that is, you can make all kinds of expedient arguments on one side or another. And there are temptations when you're running a big institution like Yale, because it is so much in the public view, and so much of what you do is scrutinized by so many different people. There's always a temptation to say, oh, this is one we can sort of hide. We don't have to deal with it. We can shove it under the rug. You can't. You just can't. There's nothing gets shoved under the rug. I mean, basically, you have to assume, I lived my life like I had to assume that everything I did or said could appear in the New York Times. I mean, you can't hide anything, so you might as well live by your values, because in the long run, that's the best way to live.
Can you respond to the second part of the question?
Yeah.
Relating that to the Coursera situation.
Yeah. I still feel that way. It's just, the profit motive it means that one of your objectives, at least, is, to make some. You've got to be sustainable. You've got to bring returns to your owners. But that's a value that also has to be weighed against the mission. We haven't decided at Coursera to become a B corporation, but a company like Coursera is certainly a candidate for that, because we do have a mission, which is to deliver, universal access to the world's best education, and we all believe in it. And we wouldn't have succeeded in getting the great employees that we have managed to attract without that mission. If we were just another ed tech startup that wanted to make a lot of money, I don't think we would have got. We're competing with Google and Facebook for engineers. Some of our senior execs have left companies like Google, Facebook, Netflix to come join us. So, and they're not there. They're really not there because they think they're going to get rich. I mean, we may all get rich, but that's not why we're there. We're there because we think this is a really important mission.
A question from this side.
Going back to the theme of universities and how they tend to have more obligation to educate the masses, you were saying that our classes today are very small and how great it would be if we opened up
Well, yeah, so let's start with why you should still pay. I paid 2 years of, actually more. My daughter took an engineering degree too. So, and I paid a lot of undergraduate tuitions at Stanford for, 3 times 4. So, And I'd pay it, and it's still worth it, because what you get in the live experience with such amazing fellow students, and with the live contact with mentors and professors, we're not going to be able to supply that on the internet anytime soon. I mean, what we're making available and democratizing is essentially the content. So if you want to master content, the Coursera is a great tool. If you want to, really do a deep dive into forming relationships that are going to mean something to you for a lifetime, to learn all the soft skills and interpersonal skills and skills of leadership and followership and teamwork that you need in life, there's nothing like these great universities. There's just no experience comparable. This is an immersion experience with a lot of brilliant people, who have enormous potential to do great things in the world, and you get to benefit from it. It's worth many times what you pay for it, actually. So I don't think GSB is going down anytime soon to the internet. I'm not worried about that. So I think the things are. I think it can be reconciled. Now the question does come up: what happened? But what about the experiences that really aren't like this? So what about second tier, third tier institutions that basically aren't residential, don't have communities? People commute in to a community college to take a course and they go home. I mean, could the internet, could a Coursera replace that? I think the answer is yes, it could. It could become a cheaper, more effective way to learn what students having that kind of experience can learn. So yes, it will cause some kind of disruption, and there will be some relocation of students toward just getting credentials online rather than getting degrees. How massive a change it will be, over what time frame, my guess is moderate and over a long time frame rather than a lots and over a short one.
Another question from Twitter.
Sure. This one's from Gabe Elizondo, and it touches on something you just mentioned a little bit, that the disruption of higher ed is going very slowly, and you've seen that over time. Is the main missing ingredient the student interaction that you just spoke about? And if so, how do you feel about sort of hybrid models like the Minerva Project or other companies that might be trying to combine mass education with those student engagement models?
Yeah. Well, Minerva's not a good example. That's ultra small scale. That's not. So that's a different. That's using both online and live methods, but for a very highly selected group. So that's I think different. I think the missing pieces so far are not. It's the network effects of bringing everybody together in one physical location which is both peer-to-peer learning and learning social skills, and it's also critical thinking, because the classroom experience, which could be replicated online, I think, with live video chat, but that would have to be small scale. I mean, I don't think you could have 2,000 students online and do the kind of critical thinking tool development, that sort of the questioning, the forcing you to defend an argument. I mean, that's very personalized, and it works very well in a 15-person seminar. Works even better in an Oxford tutorial. But these are not the things that the internet can replicate. So it's a number. It's the whole residential on-campus experience that's a big part of it, and it's the intimate contact with faculty, and it's the highly interactive classroom. All of those are ingredients of what you get that we are not delivering now. I think the technology could deliver some of that, but not all of it.
Sorry, can you stand up and?
When you mentioned that you're very interested in the accreditation, right? Having companies hire people that have done some of the courses that you put available. Is there any help that you can give to, for example, emerging companies in emerging markets? Because the content in your platform is so big. Which course am I interested that my future employee will have?
The question is, how can you help companies in emerging markets to decipher what are the courses that might be valuable to them?
Yes.
And Yeah, this is a work in progress, but it's something we're very mindful of. So yes, we've talked to a couple of large global companies that employ people around the world and tried to elicit from them what kinds of courses are valuable. What I expect will happen, it hasn't happened yet, but I'd love to see actually on our site a kind of posting that, PricewaterhouseCoopers recommends, that's a global company that has over 1 million employees worldwide, recommends these 5 courses or these 10 courses. These would be useful to us. I mean, we've had conversations with some of the corporations about this, and I think we'll get there in the next year. Probably have some of that, and that'll be a helpful guidepost. I mean, basically allow companies to demonstrate, to indicate what courses they want. Obviously, they can do it in their job recs as well. So, but actually posting guideposts on our site would have externalities, because if a PwC says this is a valuable course for us, a smaller accounting firm in Latin America could look at that and say, yeah, that makes sense to us too. Yeah.
Well, we're about to run out of time, Rick, but I do want to end with one question that I think will speak to a lot of people in the audience, because it's on the GSB application. And that question is, what matters most to you and why?
I'm tempted to say that the Giants win the World Series because I'm a lifelong fan. But that would be frivolous. When I got appointed, actually, a little sideline. When I got appointed president of Yale, I was asked by the New York Times, "Is this the most exciting day of your life?" And I responded, "No, not as exciting as when the Giants moved to San Francisco. I was 11 years old." My wife almost killed me with that remark. I mean, birth of our children, I mean, there are some things more important. But what matters to me, it may sound trivial and trite, and it could be said by many people, but making a difference in the world. I mean, I come out of a tradition. I had a mother who raised me to sort of understand, you're a person with a good mind, and you have an obligation to make a difference in the world. I mean, do something of value to others. So I'd say that's what matters to me.
Well, thank you so much, Rick.
Thanks.